Just getting into some of the controversies that people have attached to you. If I pull this up here, your statement in 2020 was, "I reject Ron Paul, and I am sorry, not sorry about it."
Mhm.
So this is considered, something of a controversial statement. And, obviously, Ron Paul is seen as a hero by many people in the libertarian community, myself included. This is somebody who has been, very prescient in his observations about the soundness of money, about the war on terror. I do know back in, as soon as early 2011, he even said, if we don't pull out of Afghanistan by the end of this year, we'll probably be there for another decade or so. Sure enough, exactly a decade later in 2021, we had that disastrous withdrawal from Joe Biden. But basically, without going on here, I basically want to address, why exactly did you reject Ron Paul in that situation? What was your
Yeah.
thought process there?
So allow me to, I'll explain this, and I want to say I've explained it elsewhere as well. So I'll be, not super drawn out with about it. But the truth is that I do believe a picture can tell 1,000 words. It can certainly tell 1,000 words that aren't quite accurate to the situation. And if people had looked through my entirety of my social media searching the name Ron Paul, they would have seen many complimentary things, certainly since that post had been put out. But to explain that post in general, this was during the very beginning of 2020. I worked in maritime logistics, and we have offices all over the world, including in China. And we'd already lost employee family members to COVID at that point. And Ron Paul produced an article that said the coronavirus is a hoax, which to me says it's fake. And when I know people who had passed away from it, it kind of made me angry. I got hyperbolic. I felt that article was hyperbolic. I was hyperbolic, and I put that post out. And then, like 2 weeks later, the entire world turned upside down. And had I even remembered I had posted that, I would have deleted it in the end. But I do that from time to time. I post something, go, oh, that was stupid, and I delete it. But the whole world turned upside down. COVID happened, lockdowns happened. And in retrospect, a lot of the things that were written about in that article came to pass. And if you look again at the things I had said about Ron Paul after that, they've been very complimentary. And so to me, it's like, to judge me based on one thing that I've said is kind of silly. And I question why the people who circulated that post as much as they did also didn't circulate the good things I had said about Ron Paul. They wanted to make it seem like I just, absolutely only ever said bad things about him. And I think the motivations to do that is to further divide the party and make it seem like I'm a candidate who hates other libertarians, which could not be further from the truth. In fact, I was like in the third row center when Ron Paul was at our convention in Reno, or not Reno, but in DC this past convention, right there along with everybody else, cheering along to many of the things that he said that I very much agree with. And so I'm happy you gave me the chance to dispel that. And I hope libertarians who are voting, like seriously, if you're voting and a tweet that I made that made you upset is causing you to change your vote to vote for somebody who's literally like Trump, who's been a war criminal, or even worse, Kamala Harris, who we know she's going to be one too, right? I urge you to really think about your priorities as a voter, because broadly speaking, I am as anti-war as Ron Paul has ever been, and I always will be. And if that is the most important thing, which I do believe, that and ending the stranglehold that our government has on our money and our monetary policy are the two most important factors. If those are the most important factors, make a statement and vote libertarian. Do not abandon your vote to the two-party system that perpetuates the war, the Fed, and all of these other things.
I do know, for example, that you have also commended Ron Paul in certain situations as well. You've said that you've wanted to adopt his policy of ending the Fed through auditing the Fed, as one particular example. Now, I think that some people, their particular issue might be that they find the language choice of rejecting Ron Paul to be maybe too strong in that particular situation. Do you think that in that case, you may have said too much, or you might have been too harsh on Ron Paul?
Yeah, as I said, I was being hyperbolic. And hyperbole is the enemy of nuance, and, in 2020, you don't think that you're going to be, you're just an average Joe. It's not somebody who's trying to represent the will of the party. And certainly I wouldn't use that kind of language as a candidate who's representing the broad spectrum of the party. I think it's important to recognize the roles that people have. And when you're not just representing yourself, but you're representing your party on a ticket, on a ballot, it's important to be a little bit more safe and secure, and well, not safe and secure, but more considerate is the word I'm looking for of your language, in particular, to make sure that you're not, misrepresenting the party. And so I think I've tried to do that as a candidate. And yeah, I would say that was hyperbolic. And I think, at the time he had written a headline that I thought was hyperbolic, and I was hyperbolic in response. I'm an individual. We're not perfect. But again, I think if that is swaying your vote, I hope that what I just said can assuage you to say, I'm going to reject the war machine. I'm going to reject the Fed. I'm going to vote libertarian.
One thing I noticed you were speaking on in your initial, disagreement with Ron Paul was in regards to the COVID lockdown. And I'm sure you are well aware that there are certain controversies attached to you regarding COVID. Now, what I've seen here is that there seems to be some type of a discrepancy between people seeing that, you've worn masks, and they have come to believe that, you supported, the government's actions during this. To give you one particular example, I do know Jeffrey Tucker spoke negatively after a certain article that Reason published about you, and his exact words were, if I pull these up right here, he said, "Not one word on the candidates' pro-lockdown, pro-mask, pro-mandate views. This guy only came out against lockdowns 20 months after they were imposed, and only because of Pax Lovid." What is your response to these claims, and how can you assure Americans that you will not resort to these same measures if another pandemic similar to COVID were to occur?
First off, I've never been for lockdowns. I've never been for mandates. And if I've been for anything, it's been for property rights. And so if you see a picture of me wearing a mask, which the most famous one that you see online is me outside of a store called Wax and Facts and Little 5 Points. And what was I doing there? I was running for office. In 2020, I was running for Congress representing the Libertarian Party. And if I wanted to walk into that store or walk into any store in that area of Atlanta, I had to be wearing a mask. And not just because the government said so. A lot of that had to do with the property owners wanting you to wear a mask when you came in. And hey, if it means I'm respecting their property rights, I'm going to do that. But my own personal medical decisions have nothing to do with what the government mandates or the government decides. I will always stand up for any individual's right to wear whatever they want to wear, take whatever circumstances to take care of themselves they want to. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to, you don't want to, as long as a property owner isn't requiring that. If a property owner does, you have to respect property rights. The same with a vaccine. You want to get vaccinated, get vaccinated. You don't want to get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. If a business wants to require vaccinations and they're going to lose out on really good employees who chose not to get the vaccine, that's the loss of that business. It's the way the market works. Similarly, if you're a business who, that is up to a business to decide and you to decide where you move into the marketplace. And as imperfect as that is the way the free market is supposed to work. That's the way property rights are supposed to work. But never will I say the government should force those things. The government should never be using the monopoly of force to control your bodily autonomy and the decisions you make about them. And I've spoken out against that. And this idea that because I wore a mask where it is required by a property owner that somehow means I'm a dupe of the state is kind of ridiculous to me, because I've always stood against the state requiring me to do anything. I've always said, if a property owner wants me to do this, I will do it. If I feel like the need to do it and that sacrifice is worth me going there. And that's ultimately how I feel about the process. And if I were president, I would rely on individuals to make decisions for themselves. I would ask them to talk to their family doctor and not rely on me, the president of the United States, to give them medical decisions. I don't have a medical degree. That's not my job. My job is to make sure that I'm executing laws in a constitutional manner and cutting down the state, not to be everybody's doctor or their nurse. You should be making those determinations about yourself, your family, not me. And so I understand. People try to make that into a controversy. But if you really looked at the statements that I made in public, including in a U.S. Senate debate, I've always talked about healthcare freedom and the freedom from mandates and not having to be required to do these things. And so I don't know how much more public I can be as a candidate about that. But no, I'm not going to apologize because I wore a mask when I visited people at a hospital or when I was at a business that required it. And I'm not going to apologize for my own personal medical decisions. I just know that I'm not going to ever ask to make medical decisions for you or anybody else, because it's not my business.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. So in this case, I'm noticing that as far as a lot of these controversies surrounding you, they seem to be, at least I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but they do seem to be some type of manufactured misinformation, really.
Yeah, something like, I'm trying to look for the word, but, basically like they are meaning to not understand on purpose. Because if you really look at the full spectrum of things, like I just saw today, I put out an October 7th message saying, hey, October 7th happened, a lot of people died, and now there's a bunch of wars going on and a bunch of people are dying. And people are saying, Chase is a dupe for Israel. He just backs Israel all the time. It's like, if you look at every other statement I've made about Israel and Gaza, it would be very hard to draw that conclusion. And to me, that is intentionally trying to misrepresent via one single tweet or one single message to try to divide. And we have to think about who would benefit from trying to divide the Libertarian Party. Why would people do that? And it's because, frankly, they don't want votes to go to the campaign. They feel like there's a two-party candidate they'd rather support. And that's their right, but it's not right for them to misrepresent somebody's record, especially when there's tons of evidence to the contrary. And I shouldn't have to be spending my time, certainly from libertarians, having to relitigate my personal beliefs. If I'm a libertarian, I'd rather spend a lot more time reaching out to folks who don't know about libertarianism, who don't know about the message of liberty, providing them an alternative on the ballot. And so for me, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think a lot of times it takes away from the broader campaign. And that's a shame that we have to spend time doing that, because most people who know me go, yeah, Chase is libertarian as can be. Like, ask any regular, normal person in my life who's not part of the party and say, name two things about Chase. And they'll say, he likes Star Trek and he's a libertarian. Like, that's probably the top two things someone's going to say about me.
Somebody might take something, they might twist it and essentially jump on it in a certain way. For example, I've seen comments recently you were making in regards to FEMA, in relation to the hurricane that has been striking this country. Mm-hmm. And, I see some people essentially trying to twist that as to some type of support of the state in this case, in the idea that the state should be above some level of criticism.
Yeah, that's funny to me, is because all I was doing was saying, listen, these reports that FEMA's out of money because we bailed out a bunch of immigrants is just not true. If you look at the way the government is funded, which I think if you want to tear down the state, it's important to know how it operates and exactly how the money gets into the hands of these different organizations and these different departments. If you look at the way it was funded, it doesn't have anything to do with hurricane preparedness. And that was just anti-immigrant sentiment to try to pass border control, to try to pass status controls on the movement of people, which I happen to be against. I happen to be for the 21st century Ellis Island. And I felt the need to say that. Now, that doesn't mean that FEMA is a great organization. It doesn't mean that in a perfect world I think they should ever exist. They shouldn't. We should decentralize those kinds of things down to the most local government possible, and particularly individuals like charities, NGOs, and nonprofits to be able to facilitate these things better. Like, if we could take all the billions of dollars we've given FEMA and give that to non-governmental organizations, they would do so much better. They would have allocated those resources so much better. That being said, FEMA exists today. They're doing their terrible job that they're going to be doing on the ground because they're inefficient as a bureaucracy. It doesn't mean those people hate the people on the ground. I think that's the thing, is like, there are certain cases of maliciousness in government. And there are certain cases of just, ineffective governance. I think the people who work at FEMA legitimately want to try to help people. They're just stuck in a terrible government system. And if you ended FEMA tomorrow, I bet you those FEMA workers would find another charity organization or aid organization to work with within the private marketplace. It's like education. If we got rid of private education tomorrow, public education tomorrow, all those teachers who are public school teachers, they would probably become a teacher somewhere else. They'd figure out another school to go to. The market would provide an opportunity for them to be an educator. Similarly, if we got rid of FEMA tomorrow, all those FEMA workers would probably be part of an individual aid organization. We can argue why that's better, why that's more efficient, why that would help more people, without being false about the way it's funded or what's happening on the ground. I think it's important to be clear and transparent, because if you're going to ask people to step outside the two-party system, which for them provides a winner half the time for them, right? If you're going to ask them to step outside that and trust you, you have to be trustworthy, and you have to be willing to be transparent with things and try to be as forthright with true information as possible. And so when you start seeing rumors like that, it's important to clear that up and say, FEMA shouldn't exist anyway. But the idea that it's terrible because immigrants got all the money is stupid. No, FEMA is bad because it's an inefficiently run bureaucratic organization that has lots of problems. And I've seen it in my adult life since Katrina onward. But no, it's not because the immigrants are taking all the money. That is allowing immigration to be the excuse for why FEMA doesn't function, and not the fact that it's because it's a giant bureaucratic mess that's centrally planned by our federal government. And so I felt it important to both clarify that and in other statements criticize FEMA's actions on the ground and their ability to not be as organized as they should, and also shouting out organizations that have done great work. In fact, I'm going to be doing a live stream later this week with somebody who has been on the ground, pulling bodies out, like helping people and rescuing people. And I want to tell their stories too. I think it's important. But the idea that I'm simping for FEMA just because I'm saying, no, you don't give the excuse that FEMA is bad because the Mexicans took all the money, which is what you're seeing online on X. No, FEMA is bad because FEMA is bad. And we can talk about immigration later. But right now, disaster response. That's the most important thing.